Sometimes the quietest places hide the loudest secrets. Deep in the Adirondack Mountains stood a small wooden cabin, silent and forgotten among the trees. Its windows were black with dust, its roof sagging under years of pine needles and snow. For 8 years of marriage, Sarah Callaway had obeyed her husband's one strange rule: never go near the cabin at the edge of their property. Michael always said it was full of family history, old papers, photos, things from his grandfather's time. But he had said it with such firmness, such seriousness, that Sarah never questioned it. Until now. 6 months pregnant and newly widowed, she stood in front of that same cabin, the brass key trembling in her hand. The wind carried the smell of pine and rain, whispering through the trees like the voices of the past. Her husband's ashes were still fresh in the lake behind their home, scattered just 2 weeks ago. He had died suddenly, no warning, no goodbye. And now, with their child growing inside her, Sarah couldn't shake one haunting thought. What did he hide from me? Her heart beat hard against her ribs as the forest seemed to lean closer, watching. For 8 years, she'd trusted him without question. But trust doesn't silence curiosity, it only delays it. And today, Sarah was done waiting. The morning light filtered softly through cream-colored curtains as Sarah stood in their bedroom, holding a framed photo from their wedding day. In the picture, she was smiling, her hair full of wildflowers. Michael stood beside her in a gray suit, his hand on hers, his eyes full of quiet love. It'd been a simple life together. Morning coffee, quiet walks by the lake, long nights talking about the future. She had been an art teacher, content and grounded, while Michael worked from home, always calm, always logical. But in one heartbeat, everything changed. 3 months ago, he'd collapsed in their kitchen. The doctors called it a heart attack, but something about it never felt right. There had been no signs, no warnings. It was as if life had simply reached in and switched him off. Since that day, the cabin at the edge of their property felt different, heavier somehow. It seemed to stare at her every time she looked out the kitchen window. Her sister, Elaine, had warned her not to dwell on it. "You don't need more pain, Sarah. Let the past rest," she'd said over the phone. But rest didn't come easily to someone haunted by questions. So that morning, after weeks of sleepless nights, Sarah decided to do what she'd promised she never would. She would open the cabin door and learn the truth Michael took to his grave. It began with a box. In the back of Michael's office, hidden under folders and tax documents, Sarah had found a small wooden box with an old brass key inside, the same key that now glimmered in her trembling hand. Next to it had been a worn leather journal filled with Michael's neat, deliberate handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was research. The first few pages spoke of local legends, strange lights in the woods, magnetic disturbances, whispers about the land being thin between worlds. But the entries became stranger. Frequency shift detected. Readings at the cabin consistent with prior findings. Then later, fluctuations increasing, containment necessary. And finally, in one page, half burned around the edges, she read, "If anything happens to me, the key is where she'll find it when she's ready. What's in the cabin may be the only thing that can protect her." Sarah's breath caught as she read her own initial S. It was as if he had known she would find this after his death. What could he possibly mean by protect her? Protect her from what? Every instinct told her to stop, to close the book and walk away. But love is a dangerous kind of courage. She put the journal in her bag, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold afternoon air. The forest trail leading to the cabin was slick with fallen leaves. Sarah moved carefully, one hand resting on her belly. Every step felt like a step away from the world she knew and into something she didn't understand. The cabin looked smaller up close, almost fragile. Its wood was dark and damp with years of rain, and vines crawled across the walls like veins. When she slid the brass key into the lock, it turned easily, as though someone had used it recently. The door creaked open, and a wave of stale air rushed out, thick with the smell of dust, metal, and something faintly electrical, like the air before lightning. She hesitated at the threshold, her breath fogging in the cold. "Michael!" she whispered, though she knew there'd be no answer. The inside was dim, lit only by thin beams of sunlight cutting through the dirty window. Papers covered every surface, maps pinned to the walls. Charts, equations, and photographs she didn't recognize. This wasn't family history. This was science. Her husband hadn't been guarding old memories. He'd been hiding experiments. And as she stepped further inside, she noticed something on the desk. A thick notebook. Its pages filled with complex notes and a single chilling line written in bold ink. The confluence is opening. Rain began to fall outside. Soft at first and then heavier, drumming on the cabin roof. Sarah sat at Michael's desk, staring at the strange crystal glowing faintly beside the open journal. It pulsed with a slow rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. She hesitated, then reached out and touched it. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, the cabin filled with a low humming sound, deep and steady, vibrating through the wooden floor. Papers fluttered. The lights flickered. Then, clear as if he were standing right beside her, she heard a voice. "Sarah." It was Michael's voice, calm, quiet, and unmistakable. She froze, her hand trembling. "If you found this," the voice continued, "something has happened to me. You must find Jay. The confluence is unstable. The crystal. It's the key." The message ended with a sharp burst of static, and the light from the crystal dimmed. Sarah sat frozen, tears spilling down her cheeks. Was it a recording, or something else? She didn't know. Before she could think further, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. She jumped, heart pounding. A man's voice called out, "Michael, are you in there?" The sound of her husband's name broke through her fear. She hesitated, stepped toward the door and pulled it open. A tall man stood outside in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, his dark jacket glistening with water. His face looked pale, and his eyes held the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleepless nights. "You're not Michael," he said, confused. "Who are you?" Sarah hesitated, gripping the doorframe tightly. "I'm his wife," she said. "Michael's dead." The man went still, disbelief washing over his face. "Dead?" he whispered. No, that can't be right. I talked to him last week." Sarah's stomach twisted. "Who are you?" The man took a breath. "James Harlow. I was his partner." "Partner?" The word felt strange. "Michael never told me about you." James nodded grimly. "He couldn't. What we were studying was dangerous." He stepped inside, wiping the rain from his face, and his gaze swept over the cabin's strange equipment. "So you've seen it all now," he said quietly. "He told me if anything happened to him, you'd come here. He said you'd find the crystal." Sarah pointed to it. "What is it?" she asked. James hesitated, then said, "It's not from here." Michael believed it could connect 2 points in time, or maybe 2 versions of the same world. The cabin sits on something rare, a confluence point, where the barrier between realities is thin. We were trying to understand it. Sarah stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. "Are you saying he was experimenting with other worlds?" James nodded slowly. "He wasn't supposed to go through, but he did. He crossed over, and he was trying to find his way back." 2 days later, Sarah followed James deep into the forest behind the cabin. The path was muddy from the rain, and fog drifted low over the ground. They stopped in a clearing where ancient stones formed a perfect circle around a large arch of grey rock. "This is the confluence," James said. He placed the crystal from the cabin onto a flat stone in front of the arch. It began to glow softly, humming with a deep vibration that Sarah could feel in her bones. "Michael's readings said this would react to high energy from the other side," James explained. The air shimmered, faint at first, then brighter, like sunlight bending underwater. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, shielding her eyes. "He's trying to come through," James shouted over the growing hum. Sarah's breath caught. Through the light, she saw movement. A human figure, faint and flickering, walking toward them. "Michael!" she whispered. The figure came closer, clearer. It was him, his face, his build, everything. He reached out toward her, his eyes full of recognition. Something small and metallic fell from his hand, his wedding ring, landing at her feet with a soft thud. The ground shook. The light exploded in a blinding flash. Sarah screamed as the world turned white. When the noise faded and her vision returned, James was lying on the ground, unconscious, and next to him, barely breathing, was Michael. He was alive. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and the cabin was now gone, torn down, its remains buried deep in the forest. Sarah and Michael had moved far away, to a small house near the ocean where no one knew their names. Their baby boy slept peacefully in the nursery, a soft rhythm of breath filling the quiet night. Michael sat beside the crib, watching him. His face looked older now, lined with both love and loss. The data he had brought back, strange symbols, formulas, and medical information from the other side, had saved their child's life. A rare genetic disorder had been detected early, treated with methods unknown to doctors in this world. Sarah stood beside him, brushing her fingers gently through his hair. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. "The place you went?" Michael looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Some doors aren't meant to be opened twice." They stood there in silence, listening to their child's soft breathing. Outside, the waves rolled against the shore, calm and endless. Somewhere far away in another world, another version of them might be standing under the same sky, wondering if the door would ever open again. But here in this life they had peace, and that was enough. If this story gave you chills, remember to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't out there in the world. They're hidden right inside the ones we love.